Come on, where's what's her name? Decorations?
What is it?
That is not the kind of voice I figured would come from an old lady. What can I purchase from you? A slime!
What do you want?
It's not even the right color. It needs to be blue or perhaps metallic for my interests. Magic Pengel on the PS2. This is a game that, before playing this for this review, I only knew through, like, degrees of separation. See, when I was in high school, for one of my birthdays, I ended up going out and buying myself a copy of Amazing Island on the GameCube. It was a game where you could create and like draw and completely customize your own custom character and then go on an amazing, fantastic adventure. And by amazing, fantastic adventure, I mean you play a bunch of completely inconsequential, dumb, disconnected minigames. And I remember while playing that, I was complaining that this game's character creation was great, but I want there to be like an actual game to it, you know? And someone told me that there's this amazing PS2 game called Graffiti Kingdom that was basically everything I wanted. And not having a PS2 at the time, I couldn't get that, and I still don't have it. Hopefully someday, though. But what does that have to do with Magic Pengel? Well, Graffiti Kingdom is apparently the sequel to this game. So I kind of went in without any real clue of what this was, but at least hoping that I would at least sort of get more of the game I was hoping for when I got Amazing Island. And to a degree, I did, but... and I'll leave it there. Now the story follows you, some generic random person, or maybe you're an elephant, I don't know, because you never actually get to see yourself, it's entirely first person, falling from the sky and becoming one with the world of doodles. And suddenly you've got this thing called a Pengel, which lets you draw your own doodles. Now go take them to an arena and go fight for your new friends who are letting you crash with them. And that's about where I got in the story. Honestly, the story itself is really not that interesting. I think the game focuses more on concept than the plot, which is a little bit scary because that reminds me a lot of Amazing Island. But either way, it sort of follows a generic, you know, you are the new wielder of the Pengel. You can now enter arenas with your doodles and help your friends by gaining colors to build better doodles and stuff. But oh, there's an evil, like, kingdom that's, like, oppressing your right to be an awesome Doodlemeister or something. But either way, it does feel a little bit generic and, honestly, far from the actual focus of the game. Now, when you start out, you're asked to draw, well, a circle, at which point I drew a boat because circles are hard. But after that, you're immediately given access to a notebook where you can draw your very simple doodle. And what's interesting about your character customization is it starts off very, very simplistic. First things first, you have to draw a body, at which point mine looked like a weird sort of pointer finger in a hand, so I named him Pointer. But either way, you only start off with the ability to draw a body, as well as only like 2 or 3 actual colors. But what's interesting is through combat and through progression through the actual story, you unlock the ability to draw more body parts, as well as get more colors, because colors are some kind of victory currency for some reason. But still, it's an interesting little progression, and it almost comes across as sort of like a mini dissertation on the theory of evolution. You start off as this one sort of awkward, wobbly, single-celled shape, and you slowly grow arms and legs and become a more complex organism as time goes on. That is mind-blowing and really, really cool if you think about it. I really like the character customization in this game. You can change your colors, provided you have more colors, although you are limited to how much paint you have at any one time, and how complex your shape can potentially get. So it behooves you to actually go out and fight people to, you know, get more colors so you can make a more complex creature. It's a neat system that is constantly evolving itself and sort of pushing you to go further. You know, you don't have this most complex creature, so go fight a guy, suddenly you can make a better one, you know? And, oh hey, you got a better one? Well, go fight a harder person, and then make a better one after that. And what's really cool about it is if you don't like your initial doodle or whatever, you can always go back and revise it. And that is awesome. So it's not just adding, but you can also subtract and modify. Really neat character creation tools here. I think I like the ones in Amazing Island a little bit more because, as far as I can tell in Magic Pengel, you only get a side view of your character as opposed to Amazing Island, which was a front view and you just had to decide thickness. Whereas this one you have to sort of just go from a side view, which I think offers less customization in terms of detail and overall definition to your character. But still, it's really, really cool. Now we get to the combat, and this is where things kind of fall a little bit flat for me. Now, on the bright side, it's not a crappy minigame compilation. Hooray! But it is an RPG, which on paper sounds awesome, but then you realize it's an RPG that's dictated by rock, paper, scissors, and that's when we sort of start getting a few issues. Okay, so here's the deal. You go to the arena, you get into a fight with someone. Using basic rock, paper, scissors commands. You have a total of 4 commands, which kind of immediately breaks rock, paper, scissors, but it kind of becomes a very, very either predictable game or a wildly unfair one, because it's an RPG that is both reliant on rock, paper, scissors, but also is very much a stat-focused RPG. And what I mean by that is, when you start out in combat, you have a total of 4 commands. You have attack, which breaks defense. You have defense, which reflects all damage back to people who use magic, which is a giant red flag right there. I'll talk about that in a sec. And then you have magic, which has an edge on attack. You then also have a 4th skill, which is charge, which is a type of healing ability, and I think it gives you a small attack buff as well. But that's weak to literally everything. Now, there are 2 rules to this that sort of govern it being more than just randomness, and that is appreciated. The first rule is you cannot repeat actions back-to-back turns. So if I used magic the first turn, I couldn't use it the second turn, and I couldn't use what I used the second turn during the third turn, and so on and so forth. Neither can the enemy. The second rule is you cannot use your charge the first turn, and that sort of coincides with the first rule to make it kind of a very easy game, in terms of at least strategy, because every turn at most you only have 3 potential options. However, it's very simple in the fact that the AI tends to use a very basic pattern, and I think this is why you can't charge the first turn, to kind of skip the pattern to understand where they're starting and where you can get ahead of them. But like, they always start off with one of the attacks, so they either use magic or attack. And then once you know that, they just sort of loop through. So if they used physical attacks, they'll block the next turn, which means don't use magic. And that means that they'll be using magic next turn, which means you need to use a physical attack. It's a very simple system that makes it pretty easy to predict. That said, I lost a lot while playing this, and you're probably wondering, well, if it's that easy, why were you losing so much? Well, it's rock, paper, scissors that's actually pretty predictable, but like I said before, it's heavily reliant on stats, like an RPG. So even if you understand that, okay, he's going to use magic this turn, I will block, therefore negate all damage and reflect it back to him, which I think is really, really, really broken, and why I think the whole rock, paper, scissors system is kind of non-functioning here. But regardless, even if you have the edge in strategy, you know sort of where on the rock, paper, scissors loop your opponent is, you can still lose just by virtue of the fact your enemy's numbers are bigger than your numbers. I want to point out, this is far from the first RPG that's used rock, paper, scissors. Go look at any Pokemon game. That's rock, paper, scissors right there. But you know, that was kind of a better rock, paper, scissors system, because it meant that if your enemy out-leveled you, but you understood their attacks and had a few tricks up your sleeve, you could still scrub out a win pretty easily. Conversely, here, even if you know your opponent's pattern, if they out-level you, you're done. But on the bright side, if you do lose, you still get a bonus of some colors and some experience, so it's not a complete loss. And theoretically, I guess you could just pound your head against a brick wall until it falls down forever, I guess, but it's not the best system I've ever seen. Again, I don't think it's the most functional rock, paper, scissors system ever, but if you build up your teammates properly, you shouldn't have too many issues. Now, one more thing I'd like to talk about in terms of battles is kind of what happens outside battles. See, you can challenge any NPC in the game to a fight, which I think is brilliant. I've only seen a few games do this, but the problem is, in order to fight your opponents, you have to go to a Coliseum. Now that's not too bad. I was in town, I talked to this one person, challenged him to a fight, walked to the Coliseum next door, and they weren't there, because they went to a different designated Coliseum all the way on the other side of the planet, and I had to walk there, which is really, really, really slow, and there doesn't appear to be a fast travel system. So that's not great. And if we're complaining about stuff outside of battle, well, everything's done in first person, but your character feels way bigger than your camera actually is, so it's really slow and clunky, and you get caught up on like the weirdest, smallest bits of geometry. And it feels like you're following set paths as opposed to actually controlling where you're going, and sometimes the game doesn't really like that you're trying to go in a specific direction, even if you're following a set path that goes there. Yeah, the camera and actual physical control outside of combat not great. Also, for whatever reason, loading involves you staring up at the sky while walking for about 100 feet, so I hope you don't walk off a cliff or anything like that. But gameplay-wise, I would say it's better than Amazing Island. I still think that the rock, paper, scissors combat is not terribly well balanced or thought out, but if nothing else, it is an actual interesting RPG, and I think that your character's development and growth and abilities are dependent on your own drawing skills. That's really cool. I wish it was a little better explained how you could influence it, but still very, very cool. But still, I think there's a lot of room for improvement here all the same. Now, the overall presentation is, well, actually, this one's a little bit tricky for me to talk about. Visually, I think it looks pretty great. I like that the doodles, you know, actually look like doodles. Again, being able to draw from the front instead of the side might have been able to help a little bit, but still, very, very cool. And I love the sort of cel-shaded look it takes. It's very, very nice. Now, that said, audio-wise, I'm not sure I can really comment too much about this game. I know the voice acting is not great, nor is the actual like writing for the game, honestly, but the biggest issue I had with this game in terms of audio is also why I can't really judge it too much. My disc seems to be scratched, and all I could get was some repeating songs and a lot of quiet most of the time, so I'm not sure if that's normal or not. I know there is some music on here, and what I heard was okay, but because I just don't have enough to actually properly judge this on, I'm just gonna give it a sort of unenthusiastic pass. But you know, visually it is quite nice. Now, if you want a copy of Magic Pengel, The Quest for Color, cheapest one I'm seeing right now is about $30, and that seems high. For me, anyway. I would probably not pay more than maybe 20, maybe 25 if you're really, really interested. But I don't think the combat is the most functional I've ever seen in this game. And similar to Amazing Island, it's more reliant on the character creation tools and the growth of your characters and the evolution of it. But it does have some neat features. I think this is a fun game, but I also see some problems with it. And it's mainly just with the way it decides to approach combat and how much it really does focus on rock, paper, scissors, and the fact that the AI seems to be really, really predictable. But either way, it was a fun little way to try and avenge the terribleness that was Amazing Island, although I do think the character creator in that one might have been a little better. You could put accessories on your creatures, for one thing. And I have to give a huge shout out and thank you to my girlfriend for donating this to the show, along with a box of a bunch of other PS2 stuff, so we got some games for a little while yet. And I think this was probably one of the more interesting games. It was sort of a wild card in the box, and you know, Magic Pengel might not be the best RPG or the best game about character creation I've ever seen, but you know what? I think everyone starts out as kind of an awkward doodler, but with time and practice and effort and a few more iterations, they might actually become great artists. Oh god. Ow. I lost to a little girl. God damn it. I am bad at doodles. I mean, I always knew I couldn't draw to save my life, but come on.
Let's go outside and play together.
Can't even beat a little girl. It's so depressing.